Good morning then, boys. So we're going to talk today about your final section of revision for paper 1 in the USA. This is the equal rights movement in the USA. We're going to talk about the equal rights movement for women and for African Americans. We're going to talk about how Johnson and Kennedy solved those equal rights problems that many people faced and how far they reached equality by the end of the unit, 1973. So we're going to talk about Little Rock 9, who were in this picture here a little bit later on. But what I'd like you to do is take a pen, a piece of paper, or your exercise book if you've got it with you, or if you're using a computer, just open up a new Word document and start writing down this is your title. And then we're going to start on by looking at segregation challenges in the 1950s. So pause me here to write down your title and then pick me back up again when we start looking about segregation. So these are people who are challenging the segregation laws in the 1950s. We start with Oliver Brown in 1954. He wants to get his daughter Linda to a local white school rather than walking further than she should have been round the corner past this white school to a black school, which was poorer funded, had fewer teachers and had fewer resources. So he wants to make sure that she had equal opportunities in the school, just like we take for granted today. This happened in 1954, and what it achieved was that equal opportunities. Everybody now had the right to go to a school, no matter what colour their skin was or background they came from. So pause me, jot down your notes about Brown versus Board of Education, then open up this YouTube link in another tab and watch that to give you a little bit more information, add to your notes, and then put your new subtitle, Little Rock 9. When you come back to the video now with me, you'll be able to start writing down your notes for this one. So, Little Rock 9 then. From the picture I'm just going to show you on the screen here, we can see one of the Little Rock 9 students here, the other 8 presumably are in front of her. We see some white students behind her who are not very impressed with her being there. This girl here, she's not hurling abuse, but she looks very suspicious, whereas this girl with her mouth wide open is clearly just shouting something at her. She looks quite angry. So what that tells us is that many white people are pretty hostile in Arkansas, where Little Rock High School is, against these 9 black students who are legally allowed to be going to school, but they are obviously not very tolerant of it. Now in the background you can also see some National Guard soldiers with their helmets on. Those people have been sent there by Eisenhower, the president, to go and protect these 9 students as they go into school. Now, it doesn't stop them from having abuse yelled at them, having drinks cartons poured all over them in the canteen at lunchtime. It doesn't stop them from having horrible treatment in America. So what it does tell us that despite the law in 1954 that Oliver Brown helped bring in, the South still resisted. People were not willing, those Little Rock 9 and others, to go to a white school. Pause this video here, open this into a new tab, and then you can add your notes onto your little subtitle, Little Rock 9, including what we've got here and what you find out from the video with that link there. When you come back to me, we're going to talk about Rosa Parks. Now, Rosa Parks, as it says here, began the bus boycott. Remember, she refused to give up her seat to a white man who walked onto a bus and asked her to stand up because there were no seats available. She didn't want to stand up after a long day, so she carried on sitting down. She was therefore arrested, and that sparked a bus boycott. This is the refusal to use the buses. That's what the boycott means, a refusal to use something, of Montgomery in Alabama for a year, just a little bit over a year, from 1954, beginning of December, to the middle of December 1955. What happened was it was encouraged by the NAACP. That stands for the National Association for the Advancement of Coloured People, and they incidentally also helped Oliver Brown and Linda to achieve desegregation in schools 2 years earlier. So what the NAACP did was they helped Rosa Parks and Martin Luther King to become a bit of a figurehead as a result of this bus boycott. At the end of the boycott in 1956, the Montgomery Council and Alabama announced that all buses will be desegregated. So that was what Rosa Parks achieved, and the NAACP achieved through this. Pause this video here, open this YouTube video into a new tab, and watch this to add your notes for Rosa Parks and the Montgomery bus boycott. And now we're going to finally talk about Emmett Till. Now, this isn't strictly on your syllabus, but it's something that I thought you might be quite interested in. I know my Year 11s have been in the past very interested in. So Emmett Till, the story goes that he allegedly did something terrible to a white girl, and the white community decided to beat him up and murder him and leave him in a ditch, because they believed that he'd abused this girl. However, there was no sign of him abusing the girl at all, and the two boys who beat him up and killed him got away completely scot-free. They were not charged with murder. So this is clearly stacked against the African American boy, who presumably was innocent. And what it tells us is not only is there no appetite, very little appetite in this particular area to encourage equal treatment of whites and blacks, but also even within the courts themselves, the trial, there's no equal treatment of whites and blacks. So it's clearly showing you even more that the Southerners were resisting the attempts to desegregate America. So watch this video if you want to find a little bit more about Emmett Till. Just a bit of a warning for you, it's pretty gruesome, so if you don't want to see what Emmett Till looked like after he was killed, then please don't watch. Okay, so the final thing on this slide is about Eisenhower. So he was president in 1957. What he did was he passed the Civil Rights Act. Now, the main aim of the Civil Rights Act was to give blacks franchise. Franchise is the right to vote. Now, this is obviously a very forward-thinking thing for him to do, and exactly what African Americans needed. However, what was more pressing for them was the ability to earn enough money to be able to look after their families sufficiently. Now, if they didn't have enough economic income, then they're not going to be able to look after their family. So what Eisenhower really needs to prioritize next is making sure that his African Americans can afford to live the life that they deserve. So this ends the segregation section. Turn onto a new page or underline this bit before we look at Martin Luther King. So this is your new subtitle, Martin Luther King and Peaceful Protest. We also call this direct action. Okay, so what he did was he was, as we know, a peaceful protester. He did not believe in a violent approach. So he was convinced that to appeal to the white American elite, who were part of the establishment and would be the ones who would change the laws, you would not use violence. He believed as soon as you were violent towards the white establishment, that they would not be sympathetic and therefore would not change any laws. So what he encouraged then was freedom rides. So this is basically the Montgomery bus boycott on a bigger scale. So all the way across America, people would refuse to use the buses or would sit in the buses wherever they wanted, to prove that buses should remain desegregated. Anyone could sit anywhere. Sit-ins, people would sit literally directly in a food counter. When Woolworths still existed, there was food counters there in America, and people would sit in these segregated areas to try and peacefully challenge the laws. Okay, they weren't doing anything wrong, they weren't annoying anybody, they weren't being aggressive, they were just sitting peacefully in areas that they weren't necessarily meant to be. Now, these people were attacked, there was much violence towards them. We've got pictures of people sitting in Woolworths with food being poured all over their heads by white Americans who were resistant to the sit-in protests. Now, in 1963, in a place called Birmingham, another town in Alabama, we've got a picture here, you can see on the top right of your screen, where there was riots. We've got footage of students marching, of children marching and being attacked by police. Now, this becomes a huge public broadcast. It's shown around the world. People across the world are appalled that America in the 1960s are not treating their African Americans and their children in a fair way. This dog here is attacking a black man. Presumably the police feel that it's going to be a good way to try and stop him from marching. Now, as we know, Martin Luther King is following this peaceful approach, so the fact that these images go around the world show the intolerance, and it begins to undermine the status of the white Americans, the white establishment. The most famous thing that Martin Luther King has, he's become very famous for, is his speech. Now, this was at the end of a march where lots of people marched on Washington. They went all the way up to the Capitol building, and Martin Luther King gave his famous "I Have a Dream" speech there. It was watched by the nation and worldwide. It was televised. We've all heard those iconic words, "I have a dream." Now, what's worth marking here is that out of the marchers, there were 2/3 were African American or other minorities, but 1/3 of them were white, which shows that there's beginning to be widespread support and unity. So whilst we have some people not willing to look out for the people who are African American in their communities, many people, a third of the marchers here, were keen to actually join the march and show their unity. To listen to the speech and find a little bit more about March on Washington, you can open a new tab and watch this YouTube clip. Now, the final thing to say on this slide before you're going to pause me and write down your notes about Martin Luther King is to think about what's going to happen as a result of the events in 1963. So we know that Kennedy was president up until 1963, and his vice president, Lyndon Johnson, took over once he died, once he was assassinated. Now, what Johnson did was he promised to uphold Kennedy's legacy by promising to bring in lots of civil rights enactments and civil rights laws. Now, what he did was he made segregation illegal, he brought in voting rights acts and things which we're going to have a look at later, but he did that as a promise of the events in 1963. So pause this video here, jot down your notes about Martin Luther King based on this video and the video that I've included in the text there as well. And when we come back to the main PowerPoint, we're going to talk about Malcolm X. So the first thing I want to talk about is the Civil Rights Act, which is the first thing that Johnson brought in, which I was beginning to mention there. What we've got that first main point that I mentioned before. African Americans were struggling because they didn't have equal pay to everybody else in America. So what the Civil Rights Act is it tries to make sure that everyone is treated equally in their jobs. So it makes discrimination in employment in the jobs and segregation in public places against the law. So this meant that the African Americans were more likely to be able to earn equally to their white American fellows. However, many African Americans felt that non-violence was not working, or was not doing enough. There were riots from 1965, 1968 in places like Los Angeles. Many of those African Americans did not feel protected by the police and weren't looking out for them. So what emerged was two groups. We've got the Black Panthers and we've got the Nation of Islam. So the Black Panthers and Nation of Islam go under the main banner of the Black Power movement. So what they did was they started to use violence in a way because they didn't think that non-violence was working. So Malcolm X is very famous for saying the words, "By all means necessary, they would achieve their civil rights." Okay, so that means they would use violence or non-violence, but they wouldn't stop at just limiting themselves to non-violence. Now watch this video here that I've linked in the text again to see a little bit about the background to that famous salute at the Olympics, where two Black Power athletes rose their fists on the podium when they achieved their gold and their silver medals, and you'll see what happened to them as a result of showing their membership of the Black Power movement. So Malcolm X here. If you want to put a new little subtitle for Malcolm X, feel free. He believed that white and black people could not live in the same land peacefully. So unlike Martin Luther King, who wanted to work together peacefully, Malcolm X wanted to separate them. Okay, so he wanted to have whites and blacks living segregated existences, separate from each other. So he also was assassinated, just like Martin Luther King and Kennedy, in 1965 there. Okay, so jot down your notes from this slide about the Civil Rights Act, about the Black Power movement, and about Malcolm X. And once you've done so, come back to me when we talk about JFK. So here we are, it's 1960. JFK is the youngest ever US president. Everybody believes he's going to be this new novel president who's going to change everything. He promises to make America better, fairer, and an equal place by limiting poverty and inequality, improving education, fighting unemployment. He says, with a stroke of a presidential pen, I will sign off things like civil rights legislation and making sure that people are living better lives. So have a read through here of these two main bullet points and this third comment on the economy to find out what he did. Pause this video and find out a little bit more about the New Frontier which he brought in. And the New Frontier was the new package of deals and acts he was promising to bring in to improve America. So you need to write your subtitle, JFK and the New Frontier, jot down your notes about what it was, pause this video, open this one, like I'm marking out now, into a new tab and find a little bit more about it. Once you come back to me, we're going to have a look briefly at the Peace Corps. So what JFK tried to do was he tried to develop the Peace Corps. He also wanted to have education reform, but we know that he was not supported. So he was not supported by people in Congress. That's just one of the American houses of government. Many of them were quite resistant to him for bringing forward civil rights legislation, and they were quite dominant over Congress, which meant they could not actually push forward many things. Now we know he was assassinated in Dallas, Texas in November 1963. So jot down your final bits of notes about the Peace Corps and about how Congress were not helping Kennedy to put forward his new acts and his changes that he wanted to put in place. And then we're going to talk about LBJ. And the LBJ is Lyndon Baines Johnson. He was a vice president when Kennedy was president. He took over after Kennedy died, then he won an election, and then he did not stand for re-election in 1968. So what he did was he said, all right, okay, Kennedy, you had some great ideas, but you died before your time. I want to continue with those ideas. He didn't call it the New Frontier. He wanted to make a bit of a change, so he called it the Great Society. But essentially what he's asking for is exactly the same things as Kennedy. So end of poverty, injustice, and a society which supported everybody in his country. He was a Southerner, which meant that those people in Congress who were resistant to Kennedy, they were mostly Southerners too. That meant that Johnson was much better at engaging with those Southern politicians because he was one of them. Now, I've mentioned the Civil Rights Act already. If you want to jot down quickly what it did, you've got it in the blue section there, banning race and gender discrimination in employment, ended segregation in public places. Really, really important that you know the Civil Rights Act here. But also important is the Voting Rights Act, okay? It's really important that you know what this did too. So once African Americans had every chance to vote and to get equal employment and to access all public places equally, it was really important for them to be able to vote equally. Now this is the next step on from Eisenhower's Equal Rights Act, Civil Rights Act in 1957. What this did was it banned literacy tests, which were really silly ways to try and stop African Americans from being able to vote. So soon, within a year, there were 400,000, nearly 500,000 new black voters. And within 3 years, most of the people in the South had registered to vote. This means it was pivotal in changing the ability for people to choose their presidents and their mayors and their senators across America. So let's talk about two things, the successes and the failures. If you want to put these as new little subtitles after your Civil Rights Act and Voting Rights Act, I think that'd be a really good idea. So let's look at some numbers. In 1959, we got 56% of African Americans below the poverty line. By 1970, it was 30%. So that's nearly halved. Okay, for white families, it's gone from 18 to 8%. Again, a huge drop. That's a little bit more than half. Got millions having a good standard of healthcare. Watch this video to find a little bit more. And then failures. So unemployment was increasing. There was riots in cities, and when we studied Vietnam, you'll know how much support that Johnson was losing because of the war in Vietnam. So his war in Vietnam was really, really unpopular. As you remember, one of those catchphrases that people used was, hey, LBJ, how many kids do you kill today? Because of the violence and the aggression that was used in Vietnam, LBJ decided not to run for president again because of these huge anti-war demonstrations. He knew he wouldn't get the popular support he needed. So pause this video here. Make sure you've got your notes about LBJ, what he did for the Great Society, the two big acts he brought in, Civil Rights Act of 1964 and Voting Rights of 1965, and then successes and the failures of his Great Society. And when you come back to me, we're going to talk about the feminist movement. So here we have Betty Friedan, and we have the name of her book, The Feminine Mystique, which began to start to question the status that women accepted that they were in. So it began to make women think that they could do more than everything that there was expected for them in the 1950s, cooking and cleaning and looking after household, and encourage women to put those ideas aside and actually challenge themselves, look for careers, look for new options, try different things. Don't just accept the stereotypical image of a woman's role. So Kennedy, who was under pressure from Eleanor Roosevelt, the late Franklin Delano Roosevelt's wife, started to question what women should do. So the report that was brought out showed that women earned less than men. Most managers were men. Only 4% lawyers and 7% of doctors were women. In some jobs, women could be legally dismissed if they were married. This happened if you were a teacher as well. Betty Friedan, picture here, published this book saying that men and women should have equal rights and women should question their status. They shouldn't just accept that stereotypical image. So this was the beginnings of the feminist movement. Pause this video here to tell you what they were asking for and what the problem was between men and women. And when you come back to me, we're going to look at the results, what these people did, what these women did to try and to solve the problem. So the Equal Pay Act, we know we've looked at that already, was followed by the 1964 Civil Rights Act, but people didn't believe that did not go far enough. So Betty Friedan, whose picture is on this screen, established the National Organisation for Women, or NOW, and what they did was they tried to change laws and fight for equality for women. We've got lots of other groups here that joined together. So NOW, within a few years of 1966, had 40,000 members. So what Congress did then, as a result, so in 1972 we have the Equal Rights Amendment, which then follows the Civil Rights Act, so it's designed to improve the situation better. So what they say is equality of rights under law shall not be denied by the United States or by a state on account of sex. So it means no matter if you're a man or a woman, you always have equal rights. So no one in the United States can stop you from having equal rights if you're a man or if you're a woman. So this was a great thing for Betty Friedan, for all these groups here, including the NOW. However, quite a lot of people were still very traditional in America. We know that America is a very traditional society. If we look back to Prohibition, the reason why it was brought in was because many movements were very traditional and did not want to have alcohol and the new modern treatment of alcohol ruining their traditions. This woman here, Phyllis Schlafly, was also very traditional. She wanted to stand up for what she thought was the right thing to do. She wanted women to avoid getting into fighting, to have abortions, to have unisex bathrooms and gay marriage. She thought that these new ideas weren't going against what women should stand for. Pause this video here, watch this link first, and then jot down, in your own words, what the feminist movement achieved in the 1960s and the early 1970s. And then you're going to come back to me for our final section, which is one of the most important decisions that was made in 1973. So, Roe versus Wade, as you know from that title, this is another Supreme Court decision. What Roe versus Wade did was it meant that abortions were now made legal for women if it was safe for them to do so. So this meant that any woman, no matter her background, could campaign for could ask for an abortion. This gave them more say and control of their bodies and timings about when to have children. This is really, really important for women, especially those who were perhaps having children and didn't want to have children, or those whose health would be damaged by having children, or maybe even those who were subject to rape and didn't want to give birth to a child that had been put there by somebody who under a case of extreme violence. So women believe they should have more control of their own bodies, and they took this case to Roe versus Wade, to Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court decided that abortion would be legalised. Watch this video to find out a little bit more. But also remember that only recently in Alabama, the state government decided to make abortion illegal now. So if you live in Alabama and you want to have an abortion, say this woman's being raped, she has to either carry through with the pregnancy and give birth to the child that she's been raped to have, or she has to cross a state border, have an abortion somewhere else, and then never return to her state, because as soon as she crosses the border back into Alabama, she can be arrested and sent to prison because it is now being made illegal. So in a way, the American government has shown its traditional roots again through this decision to make abortion illegal again in 2019. Do have a look at this video here to find a little bit more about what Roe versus Wade achieved, and then you're going to write down underneath your subtitle Roe versus Wade about the achievements of this court case. Once you've done that, this means this video is finished. That means your last bit of revision for the America section is complete. So well done for getting this far. And do send your work to your subject teacher, or simply upload it straight to Show My Homework. Well done and good luck.